Does Trump lose credibility when it comes to the Supreme Court decision on birthright citizenship?
I'll let Nico kick that off, but I mean, I don't think so. I don't think that's a loss of credibility. I think it's a valiant, important fight that needs to continue. Talk more about that, Nico, because it ended up at a 5-4 decision. I think that itself is telling.
Is it over? Is that the end? Can we do anything to change it?
No. Without a constitutional amendment, no.
Can states do anything?
No.
You need a constitutional convention or constitutional
amendment,
which requires.
Can it happen? Sure.
Look, will it happen?
This was just for some posture behind this, procedural posture, but also factual background. Barber versus Trump, right? So you had this is to define birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment, and honestly, in the back. In the past, Trump said, I don't know. So he issued an executive order. An executive order, as we all know, is not law, but it's really how the president will enforce a law and do things. So a challenge was brought by people that would be affected by this and were excluded under the executive order. The primary question that the Supreme Court, this is important, is people born under the 14th Amendment, people born in the United States, were they subject to the jurisdiction there too? That's the question. And they have to look at the history, they have to look at what was the intent of the Constitution at the time. It was a 5-4 decision, so two quote-unquote conservatives, and I have an opinion about that, Barrett and Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh really didn't side with them. He wasn't agreeing with them. He was trying to kick it back to Congress, but then screwed up, and here we have this. And then Roberts, we know, this is a classic Roberts decision. Let's just keep the status quo, and he don't want to change anything. And so the bottom line about this decision is that if you make it to the United States by any means, lie, layer, whatever you want to say, you lie, you get here, you cheat your way in here. You
hate America.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And you have children born here, that they're United States citizens for now. And so you had this dissent by Thomas. You had the majority opinion written, what they were saying and their definitions of this, and you have this historical posture behind that. And Thomas does a great job explaining that. And look, I think if you look at this, and George, you can fact check me because someone sent me this, and I don't know if this is true because I didn't have time to look at it. But Thomas makes not this part. This part I know is true. Thomas makes the point that the 14th Amendment and that clause in the 14th Amendment was for people that were freed under slavery.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they're slaves. Yeah. They weren't looked at as citizens. And they're saying, look, they were born here. These people are American citizens. They're free. That was the intent. The
Civil War ended in 1865. It was passed in 1866, ratified in 1868 to give slaves equal rights.
That's right.
Period.
But this is the part that I want to ask you about, George. You're a historian here. Allegedly, the author of this clause in the 14th Amendment, Senator Jacob Howard, have you heard about that dude? He explained, there was debates over this, and he explained that it would obviously not apply to foreigners not loyal to the U.S. And the quote is, this will not include aliens, foreigners who belong to ambassadors. So it's not a question of what he meant by it. I mean, is that correct? Can that be confirmed?
It can be confirmed.
Okay,
it is confirmed.
Well, then we know exactly what they meant by it, at least what the person who proposed it, Senator Howard, meant by it, and what everybody agreed to what it meant. So this is not ambiguous. We know what it meant, and it makes sense. But for them to redefine this, this has become, if you really look at this has become the Roe v. Wade of our time. And this is going to take decades. Yes. This is not about statutory interpretation. This is going to be the question. You watch. Moving forward on these appointment of judges and these federal judges, this question is going to be asked. Barber versus Trump. Where do you stand on it? Do you think that was properly, decided? And that's going to be the question. Before it was Roe v. Wade, now it's going to be this for decades. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm not. But this is going to cause tremendous damage to this country. Think about that, Karen.
I think about it all the time, and it seemed like such a simple decision.
So then what do you do?
That's why
now you know what you do? You want a visa? You take a pregnancy test.
Yeah.
Is that where we go? And then now your visa only lasts for a month. You can only be here for 2 months instead of 6 months. Because now there are 6 months and you have to redo them and you have to take track of them. Is that where we go? Because who thinks it's a good idea that anybody can come visit or even come here illegally, have a kid, then they're American citizens, take them back to a country that hates us, teach them to hate the country even more.
Reinforces their hatred.
Not acclimate to a country, not assimilate to the country, not even love the ideas of the country or even know what the ideas of the countries are, and then bring them back to do whatever they're going to do here. And then now they can run for office and be, president of the United States potentially. So I just think it was a horrible decision, not because of my tribe, because of what Harry Reid said. How about that? And he's not in my tribe. What Harry Reid said, what Obama used to advocate, I don't know if he meant it or not, but that's between him, his conscience, and God. But I agree with Harry Reid and President Obama before he changed. How about that? Because their advocacy is my advocacy. How about that? I'll leave it at that. I think it's a horrible decision.
Horrible is not a strong enough word, but yeah, it just
Devastating is really what it is.
Truly was. I don't think it's the end of the world. I think that constitutionally it is a very big problem. And this is the problem. They ruled on it constitutionally. They didn't rule on it statutorily.
Yes, talk about that.
What does that mean?
What that means is when you rule on it constitutionally, I mean you've established, basically ratified constitutional precedent, and so now it becomes a constitutional issue. And so to actually change it at that level, it's got to come before the court again somehow. What are the chances of that happening anytime soon? Look, Roe v. Wade, it falls categorically in the same, really sort of in the same sphere of consideration. 1973, it was passed. I mean, it was finally, literally almost 50 years in 22. They finally decided, this is really bad law. Right? And what was the basis of Roe v. Wade? The court decided that a woman's right to privacy prevailed against a state's need or ability to control abortion. Think about that. I mean, the conclusion of that is that you can privately commit murder. That's absurd.
That's not a hyperbolic statement George is saying. And this is what I've always challenged people. I guess we're supposed to talk about this briefly.
It's an absurdity.
Well, but it's a factually true statement. Why? Because I cannot think of, now, depending on what the punishment is, I can't think of a state, and there may be one, that doesn't look at the murder of a pregnant woman as a capital offense, or equivalent to the capital offense in their state. So in Texas, under the Texas Penal Code, I don't make a Christian argument. I don't make a Republican argument. I just make a statutory argument. Under the Texas Penal Code, under murder, if you murder a woman that's pregnant, some people say, because you murdered two people. Okay, so you're saying the child in the mom's womb is a person. But what the statute says is you murdered a child under 10. A child in a mommy's womb under the Texas Penal Code is a child under 10. And if you murder a child under 10 years old, that's capital murder, by the way. You can face the death penalty in Texas. So that's a definition, the penal code, not my pastor, the penal code, not my savior, the penal code says. So if we just want to separate all that stuff, Republican, Democrat, that's the penal code. That's what it is. So now what you do with that, and whether you offer life in prison or you plead down to a murder charge, 5 to 99, or you go for the death penalty, it's still the truth. There's a child in that woman's body, and the penal code, the objective penal code, recognizes a child in their body. I'm sorry, George, I just wanted to make that point.
No, I was going to say that's an example of shady law that controlled American federal perspective on abortions for 50 years. See, it takes a while. This isn't something you just sort of willy-nilly change. And there's been a history of that. Dred Scott always comes to mind, 1857, the ridiculous ruling under Taney, the Chief Justice Taney, that basically said that black Americans were not considered citizens. Yeah. And they weren't considered citizens because they were property. In fact, he came out and said that the right to property in a slave was distinctly and expressly protected by the Constitution of the United States. What year was that? 1857. So it basically said that black persons were not citizens. But that's because they're property. That's the United States Supreme Court in a 7-2 ruling in 1857. Wow. You basically ensured that you were going to have a civil war. I mean, because it's so gross, immoral, okay, and grossly unconstitutional, but then to call it distinctly and expressly constitutional that the right to property exists in owning a slave. So if you're an enslaver, the Constitution protects you seeing that slave as property. It's gross. So and on and on and on. So there's just been these moments in history where it took literally turning the world upside down to change something constitutionally. It shouldn't be that way, but that's where we are. I want to point out, and then I'll shut up on this. It occurs to me in Elk v. Wilkins, Nico, in 1884. This is just to make the contrast between Native Americans in the United States. That's
exactly what I was going to ask you about.
Well, think about how absurd this is. Now, I'll throw it over to Nico so I can weigh in on it. In Elk v. Wilkins, the court said in 1884 that Native Americans were not entitled to birthright citizenship, okay, because their allegiance, Nico, was to the tribe. So this is Native Americans who have been here hundreds of years. We're born here, right? The court said that. They were not entitled to birthright citizenship because their allegiance is to the tribe and to not the United States. They were subject to the jurisdiction of the tribe. It's an allegiance issue. It's not a soil issue. And then Congress, 50 years later, in 1984, reversed it statutorily. So constitutionally, it's never been changed. To my knowledge, there's never been a constitutional overruling of the courts. But Congress, and so this is why I think Kavanaugh, had a point. And that's why I think this
yeah,
is...
but his
this
ruling
is the only,
I mean, he's maybe right about that, but his ruling, his decision...
Yeah, saying they were constitutionally right, which is but only because of precedent, see. And the problem is, you're right, I think he's wrong, because that hasn't been the way it was presently. They failed to take into account, both Barrett and Roberts, the history and the text, which is gross. So Barrett considers herself an originalist. I can't believe she was a clerk under Scalia. It's stunning to me. She considers herself an originalist, Nico. But what good is originalism if it's detached from the sovereignty it's meant to protect?
I can't help but think this, and I don't know if I'm right about this. I think there's a lot of factors playing on Kavanaugh and Barrett. Barrett has adopted a number of children, which I think is wonderful. Yeah. Okay, but they're not from this country, right? Yeah. Or they're not. They don't look like her. I don't know if that plays in her mind that she has to defend them. I think too that the threats and the way that this tribalistic bullshit political environment we've allowed to happen, it plays on Kavanaugh. I know it has to. I mean, he had an assassination attempt that didn't come to fruition, thankfully. But I mean, someone wanted to kill him. I know what that feels like in the sense of people threatening this and that, whatever. I mean, it's unnerving if you don't have a certain.
So you're saying there are other factors at play other than their commitment to.
I think a lot of people think that.
I think that's my opinion because it's this. I don't want. I'm trying to appease certain issues. I think Barrett, it's personal. I think she struggles with something there. But again, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I have to think because these are not conservative or constitutional decisions they're making on some of these decisions. But then with Kavanaugh, I just can't help but think that he just was beaten into submission. I mean, this is what happens in communism. You don't care about the principle, you worry about your ass. And then there's threats. And look, if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong. I just think that that's some factor in there because this wishy-washiness on something as serious as this and as constitutionally, I think sound as this, with precedent, by the way. When you look at the senator that actually submitted the clause, when you look at the way it's been interpreted, when you look at the intent, and you look at the culture of the time, because you have to look at that context of what was going on at the time.
Of course.
They weren't talking about the today.
I mean, the idea that a foreigner can come, think about that. So if you're an illegal alien, you happen to be 9 months pregnant, and you give birth here, that child has immediate access, has all the rights and privileges that any American that's been here. So multi-generational Americans who have fought for this country, for the future of the country, who have toiled here, who sow into the resources of the country, the exact same right. That's an absurdity on its face. The idea that a foreigner can come here who hates the country, the child of a terrorist, automatically a citizen. So this is what birth tourism can be. This is a serious problem right now. Yep. So you literally have right now, the Wall Street Journal put a piece out this week that said that Chinese billionaires are paying women here to have children for them who will then go back to China, learn how to hate the country so that they can come back to this country and, listen to me, potentially become president of the United States. Because they're an American citizen. What, the fact that they spent time in China? They can't be... Think about what we're saying here.
Think about it.
This is insane. This is national suicide, and at the root of it is cultural fragmentation. That's what's happening here. You're bringing people into the country who have no allegiance to the country. In fact, many of them hate the country.
And this is why I said a long time ago.
But have the same rights and privileges
as much as I respect, and as mentioned many times I've agreed with Thomas and Alito, they're older. I think they should have been replaced strategically with true conservatives, not Barrett and Kavanaugh conservatives. But at least, look, and the whole thing about Supreme Court justices being lifetime appointees is so they don't fall for this tribalistic political bullshit. That's why. That, I'm going to be replaced by the next president or this. And they're supposed to be loyal to the Constitution. It's apolitical. It's supposed to be nonpartisan. Yes, you're appointed by the president or the party that's in charge at the time, but Congress has to agree to you. All I'm saying, affirm you. But that's the whole idea behind it. But now it's become so political. I mean, look, when's the last time Sotomayor or Jackson or Kagan or whatever agreed with Alito? I mean, there's some things, there's some 9-0 decisions on stuff that's no-brainers. And this whole men and women's sport, people are like, we got some of them. That's such a low-hanging fruit. That's not even a win. I shouldn't even come up to the Supreme Court. Right. It's disgusting and embarrassing as a country that it had to go to the Supreme Court. And it still wasn't 9-0. So you're going to tell me that that wasn't a win? That was It shouldn't even gone in the first place. So that's
Yes.
how we're trained. We're trained to think that the Supreme Court, not unanimously, saying that a dude with a dick cannot beat the crap out of a woman in a sport, that's a win for this country.